Hello everyone. While people have presumably been noting the anniversaries of their children's births for as long as we've had calendars, they didn't always have the kinds of celebrations we often see today. So, where did things like parties, presents, cake, and piñatas come from? Well, to explain that, we should start with the earliest known birthday celebrations. Based on the Tanakh, it seems that the practice of celebrating birthdays may go back to ancient Egypt, as Genesis 40:20 references the pharaoh's birthday as being celebrated with a banquet. In traditional Judaism, the only birthday celebrations would be for a boy's 13th birthday, his bar mitzvah, and the mention of the pharaoh's birthday is the only one in the Tanakh, which would definitely suggest that this was indeed an Egyptian practice that they were recording. However, things might not be as cut and dry as they seem. This narrative probably would have taken place toward the end of the 2nd millennium BCE, but there's no other evidence of the Egyptians celebrating birthdays until well into the 1st millennium BCE. Given that the Tanakh is believed to have first been transcribed and compiled from oral histories between the 8th and 1st centuries BCE, it's entirely plausible that this practice was an anachronism that found its way into the narrative, and some scholars have proposed that the original celebration was not for the pharaoh's literal birthday, but for his coronation or birth as a god. If we ignore the biblical account then, evidence points to the Persians as being the first people to celebrate birthdays. According to Herodotus, the Persians treated birthdays as their most important events. They would be celebrated with food, with wealthier families serving baked animals such as donkeys, horse, cattle, or camels. The king's birthday would be an extra special occasion, marked by large feasts. Some scholars suggest that Persian influence after their 6th century BCE conquest of Egypt is also the origin of Egyptian birthday celebrations, tying back to the possible anachronism in the book of Genesis. Now, numerous unrelated cultures across the world have different types of birthday celebrations, but since I obviously can't cover all of them, this is where I'm going to hone in on the Western-style birthday celebrations that are now practiced across much of the world. We can trace many of our birthday celebrations to ancient Rome. The Romans considered the day of creation to be important for all sorts of things. When it came to people, birthdays were regarded as days of sacrifice. Each person was considered to have their own personal genius, or guardian spirit, who provided them with a year's worth of protection in exchange for an annual sacrifice on their birthday. In addition to sacrifices, these events were marked with a few other rituals, including dressing in white, burning incense, and, more familiar to modern practices, gathering friends and making ritual cakes. Gifts were also given, but in contrast to today, the person having their birthday would give the most gifts to their guests, rather than the other way around. Birthday candles may have also started with the Greeks or Romans, but the details are fuzzy. Several of my sources claim that the Greeks made moon-shaped cakes as part of a ritual for the lunar goddess Artemis, decorating these cakes with candles to give them a moon-like glow. However, I can't find any primary sources validating the existence of this ritual, let alone anything conclusively linking it with birthday traditions, so take it with a heaping pile of salt. According to another explanation, which is both more vague and more probable, birthday candles may have simply developed out of the common usage of candles in pagan altars. This may have passed into popular birthday traditions through the religiously grounded birthday rituals of the Romans, or later through a general association between candles and divine protection in pagan Europe. With the introduction of Christianity, birthday celebrations became a bit taboo for a time. For early Christians, birthday celebrations were considered pagan festivals to be viewed with disgust. However, birthdays were cast in a new light with the adoption of one particular birthday celebration. Around the 4th century CE, many Christians began marking the 25th of December as a day to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. Over time, this gave rise to celebrating the birthdays of lesser figures within Christianity, such as patron saints. In many cases, Roman birthday practices were adopted to celebrate these birthdays of saints, including things like gift-giving and gatherings. Monarchs too began celebrating their own birthdays, often with festivities such as feasts or tournaments. With all of these important figures having their births celebrated, it was only a matter of time before the common people started to treat their own personal birthdays as worthy of celebration. Especially after the Enlightenment, when the use of a universal calendar became more widespread, the ideals of personal freedom were popularized, and a new middle class between peasants and nobility who had money to spare began to grow more prominent. As far as I can find, our earliest confirmation of modern-style birthday cakes decorated with candles comes from 18th century Germany. While we can't say for sure how far back the practice goes, it was recorded in an English account of the 1746 birthday of Count Ludwig von Zinzendorf. According to the author, there was a cake as large as any oven could be found to bake it, and holes made in the cake according to the years of the person's age, every one having a candle stuck into it, and one in the middle. According to one of my sources, this practice started with the German Kinderfest, or Children's Festival, in which children would be presented with gifts and a cake topped with a number of candles, one for each year of their life, plus one extra to grow on. A similar practice was recorded in Switzerland in the 1880s, with a number of candles equaling the person's age, and each being blown out one by one. According to another of my sources, the act of blowing all of the candles out at once while making a wish came from Kinderfest, but I can't find verification on this, so take it with a grain of salt. The Industrial Revolution enabled an increasing number of people to participate in these kinds of rituals, with mass production making it cheaper to get a decorated cake. By the 1920s in America, most of the traditions we associate with birthday parties had solidified. Among these was the iconic Happy Birthday song. Originally composed in the late 19th century by a kindergarten teacher named Patty Hill and her sister Mildred in Kentucky, the song was originally titled Good Morning to All, and was designed to be something easy for Patty's students to memorize. The modified lyrics first cropped up in print in 1912, and from there, the song became popular across the country and the world. Today, it's listed as the most widely recognized song in the English language. There are many other birthday traditions we could go into, but I'm going to finish up by talking about one in particular, the piñata. Piñatas probably originated as part of Chinese New Year celebrations, where, according to Marco Polo, people would take vessels in the shapes of oxen, covered with colorful paper, and break them open with sticks, releasing seeds. The remains would then be burnt and the ashes collected for good luck throughout the year. In the 14th century, a similar practice made its way into European celebrations of Lent, with clay pots instead of animal shapes. The Italians would introduce the name piñata, or fragile pot, but the Spanish made the practice their own. During the colonization of Mesoamerica, the Spanish found similar practices amongst certain indigenous groups. The Aztecs had a practice where a clay pot decorated with feathers was balanced on a pole and broken to release gifts such as corn cobs and jewelry, serving as a birthday offering to the god Huitzilopochtli. The Maya, meanwhile, had a game where a pot would be suspended on a rope and a blindfolded person would try to shatter it. Spanish missionaries, always happy to synthesize their practices with native ones to win converts, adapted these practices into a Christian ceremony called Los Posadas in 1586, coming up with new details and meanings to firmly root them in Christianity. The piñatas were traditionally made with 7 points, representing the 7 deadly sins. The decorated pot was said to represent the devil, wearing an appealing mask. Inside the piñata, fruits and candies represented earthly pleasures the devil tempted people with. Finally, the blinded participant represented blind faith, the only way to resist temptation. The hitter would be spun around, sometimes 33 times to represent the life of Christ, and then the other participants would yell out false directions to lead them astray. Breaking the piñata therefore represented faith overcoming evil, and the goods inside fell as rewards for keeping faith. Over the centuries, piñatas have largely lost their religious meaning, and while initially specifically associated with Las Posadas in Mexico, today piñatas are used for all sorts of different occasions. When they were introduced to the US, meanwhile, they became pretty specifically associated with birthday parties, though among Mexican-American communities, they remained popular as parts of other sorts of celebrations. There are so many other practices associated with birthdays I could go into, but that covers the most popular ones I could think of. As you can see, some of these practices have long histories, while others are a bit more recent. It's always interesting to look into the history of mundane things that we often take for granted, where even something like birthday parties have a long and interesting history. If you want to learn more history like this, please like and subscribe. Thank you for watching everybody, and I will see you next time.